Bonjour tout le monde, j'ouvre maintenant la séance.
Good day and welcome to meeting 19 of the Standing Committee on International Trades, meeting number 90 rather. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those online, please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. That is, mute yourselves when you're not speaking. For interpretation online, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those of you in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I'd ask all participants to be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback, which can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. Please speak only into the microphone your headset is plugged into, and place earbuds away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, for members in the room, if you do wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. If any technical issues arise, please inform me immediately. We may need to suspend to ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming proceedings. So, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the Committee on Tuesday, October 17, 2023, the Committee is continuing its study of Canadian businesses in supply chains and global markets. We have with us today, from the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters, Past Chair Kim Campbell, thank you. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Matthew Holmes, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations, welcome. Robin Guy, Vice President and Deputy Leader, Government Relations, thank you for being here. From Supply Chain Canada, we have Michael Wellen, Board Chair, National Board of Directors, thank you, as well as Martin Montanti, Chief Executive Officer and President, who's also here with us, but by video conference. Thank you for being here. Welcome to our witnesses. So we'll start. Did I forget someone? No? Okay. All right, let's start with some opening remarks, and then we'll proceed with rounds of questions. So let's start with Madam Campbell. I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for including the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters, CIIT Canada, on your agenda to allow for input on this important topic. My name is Kim Campbell, and I'm the past chair of our association, and we appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee to share our thoughts on programs, tools, and measures that could support the growth of Canadian business here and abroad. CIIT Canada is a national trade organization that has been speaking on behalf of Canadian trade for almost 90 years. Our members include importers, exporters, Canadian manufacturers who both import and export, wholesalers, distributors, retail importers, and exporters in Canada as well. We represent both the largest and smallest small and medium-sized businesses. Our members import and export across most commodities and product lines. CIIT Canada endeavours to be a trusted facilitator between business and government to inform and influence outcomes of policy and real-world application for the movement of goods across Canada's international borders. The private sector needs transparency, predictability, and ease of use in all of our interactions with government, but this really is more so at the border. The current business environment remains challenging for our members as we continue to recover from the pandemic, and we've had subsequent border disruptions such as BC floods, protests, and port and rail labor disputes. Each one validates the importance of an open and fluid border. When only one part of it is disrupted, it causes increased costs, lost sale, food insecurity, and economic hardship across the entire supply chain. Canada has set ambitious targets for increasing its overseas exports, with a goal of achieving 50% increase by 2025. To meet these targets and ensure we have a properly functioning border, we believe the Government of Canada must do something different. We need more collaboration and coordination with a strong mandate to create a best-in-class supply chain. This can only be achieved with industry inclusion in the mandate and a voice at the table. Too often we are disappointed in the lack of engagement and dialogue. We must do better. It is our belief that there must be accountability and oversight to ensure we are achieving our desired outcomes. Having agencies and departments work in silos with no overarching mandate has not proven effective to date. We would like to share some current challenges we believe impact the supply chain and an unused opportunity to leverage CUSMA that provides a framework for customs and trade facilitation. CARM has been described as a digital innovation by the Canada Border Services Agency that aims to transform the process of assessing and collecting duties and taxes on commercial goods imported into Canada. This initiative is a multi-year project that will change how duties and taxes are imported for goods and how they are collected and managed. It was to reduce the cost of importing to trade chain partners. Unfortunately, we have a project that is vastly over budget, late, and missing key registration and performance targets. Businesses continue to absorb unnecessary costs trying to implement due to CBSA's inability to follow a recognized IT project methodology. CBSA continues to change plans, which have forced industry to reinvest multiple times. Policy decisions will add direct costs that importers do not have to contend with today. The solution itself is complicated, confusing, and layered with manual processes that are currently automated. Despite not proving that CBSA is ready to implement because we are missing policies, regulations, implementation plans, and have not achieved acceptable testing results, they will implement this project on May 13th, 2024 with a big bang approach. Their decision to make it a requirement for importers to create a portal account and obtain their own financial security for the goods to move past the border without payment of duties and taxes is expected to cause large-scale border disruption. Today, almost 100% of shipments move unimpeded past the border and all processes are digitalized. On May 13th, for those shipments that do not meet the new criteria, they will be forced to release their goods at the border by paper and pay duties and taxes. CBSA has recently implemented a mandatory filing of a data set before goods enter Canada. This is required to be done by freight forwarders who play a critical role in the logistics industry by ensuring the smooth and efficient movement of goods from point of origin to the final destination. Penalties are now being assessed when CBSA believes their policy is not being followed. The penalties are significant and escalating. Although CBSA continues to state that AMPs are not punitive, industry does not agree. Unfortunately, many freight forwarders are now having to consider bankruptcy, and in addition, many transportation companies are reconsidering Canada as a place to transport goods because the stakes are too high. The downstream impacts are significant as importers and exporters have less options for shipping goods into and outside of Canada. Industry continues to raise this with CBSA, but today...
En conclusion, s'il vous plaît, Madame Campbell.
Thank you.
Could you wrap up, Madam?
Vous pouvez terminer, vous pouvez conclure.
You can wrap up.
Okay, I will just offer some final potential suggestions. In 2019, in collaboration with CIFA, the trade association that represents freight forwarders, we put forward a white paper on a path to a smart and secure commercial border. 5 years later, the content and recommendations remain the same. We believe that there is an opportunity to try something different by working together as legislators, regulators, and industry to create a world-class border that will ensure the health, safety, and security of our economy. We would encourage you to read our white paper. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Campbell. Alors, je passe maintenant la parole.
Thank you, Madam Campbell. Mr. Holmes, Mr. Guy, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For the chance to appear before you today. The question before this committee is a significant one. When the value of 2/3 of Canada's GDP is based on trade activity, how we manufacture and move goods across the country, how we prioritize and protect our critical trade infrastructure, and the markets we choose to focus on, whether next door in the U.S. or as far as the Indo-Pacific, have outsized impacts on the health of our economy, opportunities for our business, and the quality of life of everyone in the country. While our supply chains have largely recovered from the worst of the pandemic's disruptions, many of our members continue to face disruption, inconsistent supply, and persistent inflationary pressures. According to the most recent Canadian Survey on Business Conditions, a quarter of businesses still identify supply chain challenges as a key concern, and one that over 60% of them expect to persist. The evolving role of transportation and logistics is critical to Canada's competitive success, but our supply chains remain only as strong as their weakest link. The challenges and costs presented by climate shocks, such as frequent floods and wildfires, have demonstrated how fragile many of our supply chain systems and structures are. And in the context of a highly restive labor environment, key points in our trade corridors have experienced repeated or prolonged strikes, putting further strain on a precarious system and compromising our reputation as a reliable place to do business. Canadians are frustrated by the affordability crisis. They want to see products move and prices remain stable. This requires business and government sharing the common goal of a functional supply chain and a growing economy. To do this, we need to see long-term investment in Canada's trade infrastructure. Businesses need to be able to get their goods to market reliably. We can't just simply look to address the needs of today, but the challenges and opportunities that we see 20 and 30 years from now.
While government isn't solely responsible for infrastructure investment, a federal commitment to major strategic long-term investments is key to building Canada's trade infrastructure. The government's National Trade Corridors Fund is a positive step forward. While to supporting worthwhile projects, the government must work to increase the speed at which projects receive funding. It must work with business on ensuring transparency for projects and by continuing to demonstrate how funding is helping address supply chain challenges, both of today and tomorrow. We need government to lead the development of a vision for Canada's trade infrastructure. This committee's 2019 report on the topic included a number of important recommendations, including protecting industrial lands along trade corridors, the need for regulatory harmonization across jurisdictions, and the imperative to ensure environmental assessment timelines do not hamstring our ability to move goods across the country. A 2021 European Court of Auditors comparison of frameworks for large transportation projects in Canada, Australia, the United States, Switzerland, France, Norway, and the European Union noted all but Canada had an overarching transport infrastructure strategic framework. In addition to vision, we need government to protect our critical supply chains from predictable and preventable threats. While government can't solve all of our supply chain issues, it must put in place policies that will enable trade and strengthen supply chains. The introduction of Bill C-58, which aims to prohibit the use of replacement workers during strikes, suggests the government actually wants to move away from preserving stability. In fact, it is doubling down on Canada being seen as an unreliable and unstable trading partner. Lastly, we need government to commit to accelerating its regulatory modernization agenda. Regulatory modernization continues to be a growing concern. Business who trade interprovincially cite increased red tape and differing certification and technical standards as major obstacles to doing business within Canada. Unfortunately, Canada has a complex network of overlapping regulations from all levels of government that diminish competition, discourage open trade, and make everything more expensive. Regulatory effectiveness is integral to a competitive environment and requires smarter regulation to attract new economic opportunities to Canada. We believe that it is an imperative that regulators and businesses work together to share perspectives to develop optimal regulatory approaches. An economic lens mandate for regulators would add a new tool that would encourage stable, manageable regulations that support economic growth. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Merci à vous. Alors...
Thank you. Actually, I apologize because I failed to recognize Mr. Greer, Ryan Greer, Vice President, Public Affairs and National Policy at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me here today on behalf of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Since 1871, CME has been helping manufacturers grow, improving the well-being of their workers and the communities in which they operate. We are pleased to participate in your study on the contributions of Canadian companies to domestic and global supply chains. Members of this committee will know better than most that the global supply networks that Canadian firms participate in are in a state of continuous transformation under the influence of complex technological, geopolitical, and environmental factors. Amidst this ongoing change, CME continually surveys our members and the domestic and international conditions in which they operate to provide the best advice possible to policymakers. CME recently released our latest findings and recommendations to revitalize Canada's manufacturing sector in a report, Manufacturing Canada's Future, which we will share with this committee to support your work. Manufacturing Canada's Future provides a comprehensive set of recommendations on how governments can help Canadian manufacturers seize the opportunities presented by the current global environment. In the next few minutes, I'm just going to quickly touch on a couple of issues that we believe are critical to your study. The first is that Canada must take action to change the trajectory of business investment in the manufacturing sector, which has been weak relative to our global peers for the last 2 decades. Capital investment is critical for long-term growth and being competitive in global markets. Increasing our domestic manufacturing capacity will increase our exports. In fact, Canada's investment in the manufacturing sector over the last 20 years has been so sluggish that it has been unable to compensate for the depreciation of existing plants and assets. The stock of capital in Canada's manufacturing sector peaked in 2000 and has been trending down ever since, whereas it continues to climb to record highs in the United States. This is another worrying sign that Canada's manufacturing sector is becoming less competitive on the global stage. While there are a range of tax and regulatory steps that the federal government can take to help incentivize manufacturing business investment, the single most urgent step is to accelerate Canada's response to the Inflation Reduction Act. The race to build and lead the transition to a clean economy is one of the most significant global economic transformations since the Industrial Revolution. The IRA is reordering global supply chains, and as Budget 2023 correctly noted, and I quote, "Without swift action, the sheer scale of U.S. incentives will undermine Canada's ability to attract the investments needed to establish Canada as a leader in the growing and highly competitive global clean economy." CME is pleased that the government has taken many of our direct recommendations and worked closely with the manufacturing sector in developing Canada's response, specifically the 5 investment tax credits announced in Budget 23. However, Canada must act with more urgency to get these ITCs in place, specifically implementing the clean technology, carbon capture and utilization, and clean manufacturing ITCs. Notwithstanding the eligibility dates for these credits, industry is still waiting for the application and policy guidelines for these tax credits. Businesses cannot yet apply, and this uncertainty is impacting business decisions. Global and North American supply chain opportunities are being missed and will continue to be until these tax credits are in place. The second critical issue I'd like to raise, to echo some of my industry colleagues at the table, is challenges facing Canada's transportation networks that manufacturers rely on for their inputs and to reach their customers. Recent labor disruptions, capacity constraints, and extreme weather-related events have impacted the speed, agility, and resilience of our transportation infrastructure and manufacturing supply chains. Transportation and trade-enabling infrastructure is one of the single best economic investments that any government can make because it makes all the users of that infrastructure more productive. However, unlike many of our competitors, Canada's investments in transportation infrastructure have been made sporadically rather than in a sustained and strategic basis. CME has been working with industry partners and is supportive of the proposal for a Canada Trade Infrastructure Plan to develop an integrated long-term transportation infrastructure investment strategy. Lastly, as this committee considers its recommendations for net new supports, programs, or other interventions, we would strongly encourage you to reconsider current government initiatives that will harm manufacturers' ability to attract and retain new customers. Specifically, we too have concerns with Bill C-58, the legislation before the House of Commons that will ban the use of replacement workers in federally regulated workplaces. Having just conducted meetings on the economic and reputational impacts of last year's work stoppage at the Port of Vancouver, we hope that members of this committee will oppose this or any other measure that will create an imbalance in the collective bargaining process in this country. C-58 will result in more strikes and strikes that last longer. These stoppages have significant costs that will be borne by Canadian manufacturers, their workers, and their families. More labour disruptions that last longer mean lost customers and a further decay in Canada's reputation as a reliable trading partner. At a minimum, we are hopeful that the report coming out of this study will acknowledge the negative impacts of C-58 on the manufacturing sector's ability and contributions to global supply chains. I know there are a range of other supply chain and other trade issues that this committee is looking at and as part of this work, and I'd be pleased to discuss them as we continue. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Merci, Monsieur Gray. Alors, maintenant, Monsieur...
Thank you. Mr. Whelan, you now have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Hello, and thank you again for the invitation to speak with you today. I'm Mike Whelan, Chair of Supply Chain Canada Board of Directors, and I'm joined virtually today by Martin Montanti, our President and CEO of Supply Chain Canada. I'd like to begin with an introduction to Supply Chain Canada and our association. With its roots dating back to 1919, Supply Chain Canada, also known as SCC, is one of the oldest and largest supply chain associations in the world. Supply Chain Canada is a national organization that provides critical skills, networking opportunities, and advocacy for its members. Supply Chain Canada is one association with multiple parts. We are composed of 8 institutes across the country, and through our 8 provincial institutes and territorial institutes, Supply Chain Canada grants a supply chain management professional designation. the highest achievement in the field and the mark of a strategic leadership in supply chain. Leaders from our institutes and from the national office form our Federation Council, bringing different perspectives from all parts of the country from coast to coast to coast. With over 4,000 members across Canada, our goal is to provide leadership to the Canadian supply chain community and to work with government to address the ongoing needs of Canada's end-to-end supply chain. With our membership, we work to generate and share ideas to improve the supply chain system and ensure that Canada is a strong and competitive environment for domestic and international investment. In 2022, Supply Chain Canada was pleased to see the Government of Canada move forward with the Supply Chain Task Force and ready and willing to participate. We believe this was a vital step in addressing some of the most pressing issues across our supply chains. Supply Chain Canada was honoured to provide valuable insight into the creation of the Supply Chain Task Force report, Action, Collaboration, Transformation, which outlines specific goals across the supply chain. In 2023, Supply Chain Canada held a town hall with its members across the country to review the report of the Supply Chain Task Force, and our members welcomed the opportunity to react and share their expert advice on how to ensure the goals in the report are met in a timely and efficient manner. Through our ongoing collaboration with Supply Chain Task Force, Supply Chain Canada was able to provide our members with the highest priorities to ensure that Canada addresses the needs and shortcomings of our supply chain. Supply Chain Canada members provided the task force with recommendations on 3 core themes: automation and technology, supply chain disruptions, and labour shortages. Under automation and technology, it was discussed that we need to introduce government grants that encourage automation at ports and other key points in the supply chain to support increased efficiency and reliability. We need to prioritise the development of guidelines to ensure that our supply chains are safe from cybersecurity threats. We need to create jobs through the modernisation and optimisation of Canada's ageing infrastructure to further increase Canada's economy. In supply chain disruptions, it was recommended to ensure that disruptions, environmental protests, and cybersecurity are mitigated through intergovernment partnerships. This would not only to ensure the stability across the chain, but would specifically help to mitigate external and international threats related to our cybersecurity, whether they are caused from natural disasters, human mischief, and/or labour disputes. Risk mitigation strategies must be developed. Guarantee that new technology and automated infrastructure has a reliable cybersecurity network to make Canada a reliable global partner, and introduce an interprovincial communication channel for proactive messaging to enhance collaboration between the provinces and territories on supply chains. The labour shortage. We provided the recommendations such as familiarising high school students with basic understandings of supply chains and the ways they affect people across Canada and around the globe. Ensuring that Canada's training programs and designations are in line with the realities and experiences of modern supply chains, a shift towards a balanced training approach by ensuring that training programs return to in-person, ultimately allowing professionals to get hands-on experience during their training. Address the elimination of red tape to ensure that foreign workers fill labour gaps by obtaining timely work permits, including in sectors where domestic talent might not exist. Explore accrediting qualified permanent residents and student visa holders to address some of our short-term as well as our long-term goals. Promote professional careers across the supply chain to create competitiveness and increase investments in manufacturing, distribution, and production of goods and services. Each of these recommendations can be found in the Task Force Transforming Ideas into Action submitted Supply Chain Canada Task Force in 2023. Through the Town Hall with our members, it became clear that Canada's labour shortage is based on a skills shortage. Through its many training and skill development programs, Supply Chain Canada is poised to train and fill labour gaps through our competency, benchmarking tool, and education program. It can benefit both the practitioners and organisations in the supply chain industry and can be used to identify strengths, analyse skill gaps, and benchmark the individual against peers. It can be used to get extensive look at cross-functional skills, and for individual practices, there are more than 400 individual competencies that have been carefully chosen and laid out. Whether the individual wants to advance with their organisation to pursue new opportunities, competency benchmarking tool offers a clear roadmap.
Merci, M. Whelan. J'invite maintenant les membres.
Thank you, Mr. Whelan. I'd now like to invite committee members to ask questions. Mr. Seebeck, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Canada's a trading nation. I think we all know that. Canada is about, our GDP is about 70% from trade. It depends on the year. It fluctuates. United States GDP is about 20 to 25% of GDP from trade. But when we look at the actual overall infrastructure ranking, in 2014-2015, Canada was ranked 14th in the world. The United States was ranked 18th. United States is now ranked 12th and Canada is ranked 27th.
Now, that's based on 2019 numbers. This is from the Canada West Foundation, and it's on a steep decline, so I assume it's gotten worse. Same thing, 2014-2015, the UK was 29th, Canada was 14th. UK is now 10th, Canada is 27th. Looking at China, same period. Canada was 14th, China was 73rd, Canada 27th, China now 33. We have a report from this government, the National Trade, the supply chain report, that Canada needs to invest $4.4 trillion in infrastructure. Now, they've budgeted $4.6 billion between 2017 and 2028, whereas it would appear that we need $88 billion a year to continue to increase our infrastructure for exports. We're an exporting nation. I find these numbers shocking, and we are going absolutely in the wrong direction over the last 8 years on the quality of our infrastructure for transportation. I'd wonder if the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters, Canadian Chamber, and the Canadian Manufacturing and Exporters, if you want to comment on these numbers, are you as shocked as I am at how rapidly our infrastructure is declining, given the importance of trade to this country? Whoever wants to go first. How about the Chamber goes first?
To speak to that quickly, thank you for the question. I think these sorts of investments are, by their nature, long-term investments. And so what we're seeing in other jurisdictions is an acceleration and a real intentional build-up of the infrastructure that's critical for trade. And you can look at across multiple sectors. In the U.S., for example, you just look at LNG exports. 10 years ago, that wasn't really a sector there, but now they're a major player in the global export market for that one sector. And that's something that Canada has not chosen to develop and build out. So we go through the line, and you can see lots of opportunities and also lots of missed opportunities for investment. The time frame for those, again, though, is a long-term one. So what my colleague here in raising the framework that many other nations and regions have, that's a first step. We need a plan, we need a framework, and then we can get to work building.
The United States, only 20 to 25% of their GDP is from trade, and yet their infrastructure has gone from 18th to 12th. So they see the importance. Whereas Canada, 70%, and we've gone the exact opposite direction in the last 8 years. So to the other two, I find this extraordinarily concerning for an exporting nation, and I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
Happy to comment. We would 100% agree with you, and we're talking about increasing 50% by 2025. That was the goal. So our thoughts are we really need the plan, as our colleagues have already talked about. Layered in that a bunch that would have to be a government and industry commitment. So that's one of the things that we feel is lacking largely. There is no plan, an overarching mandate to get us all to where we need to be.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm not shocked by it. We're not shocked by it, but only because we've been talking about this for a long, long time, dating back to even before the Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative. The predecessor to the NTCF existed. We've been calling for a long-term framework to make these investments. As I mentioned in my remarks, this kind of infrastructure makes all of its users more productive. So when we talk about Canada's declining productivity, there are lots of things we can do to address that, but significantly increasing our investments. The only thing I would add, in addition, is I said we make these investments sporadically. We have programs, companies, organizations apply for them, work with all levels of government. There is no strategic framework that actually describes what the single most important export infrastructure projects are in this country. I would love to know what the federal government, working with its provincial and municipal partners, see as the top 20, 25, 50, 100 trade-enabling projects are that are important for our prosperity for the next several decades, so that we can harness all of the resources, not just the funding, but regulatory and otherwise, to get them built.
Yeah, so there's a lack of federal leadership in figuring out what these priorities are. That's the sense that I'm getting. Now, we have a trade minister who's going around saying we're going to sign all these new trade deals to try and increase Canadian exports. But if we don't have the actual infrastructure to do it, it seems to me like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing on these things. Would you agree that that appears to be what's happening?
Say a comprehensive strategy that works across all departments and all players is entirely necessary. But it's not just linked to your investments. It's not just linked to your FTAs. It's how you get the skilled labor required to support those supply chains. It's how we prevent labor disruptions. You can have all the infrastructure in the world. If you don't have the people to help move the goods along it, it doesn't get you anywhere. So it certainly needs to be, it can't be a siloed approach. It has to work across all departments and agencies and all levels of government because it's so critical to the future prosperity of our country.
And I think the Port of Vancouver is ranked second worst in the world for efficiency and productivity. So when we talk about an Indo-Pacific strategy to expand trade, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of urgency to improve the efficiency at the Port of Vancouver as well, which to me is a huge problem.
Je regrette, nous n'aurons pas le temps pour la réponse, mais vous pouvez...
Unfortunately, there won't be time for the answer, but you can keep that under wraps until the next turn. Mr. Arya now has the floor to ask some questions. You also have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Greer, I'm happy that you brought up the transformation that is happening in the global supply chain. Though the Canadian trade is dominated with our trade with our U.S. partners, because of the complex nature of the global supply chain, that if Asia sneezes, we catch the cold.
Monsieur Arya, on me souligne que le mauvais micro est allumé.
Mr. Arya, the wrong mic seems to be on. Looks like the other mic is on, but not yours.
I don't know why that is on.
No.
There you go. Okay, I'll start again. Mr. Greer, thanks that you brought up the issue of the global supply chain and the transformation that is taking place due to many factors, including the changing geopolitical structure and the changes in the globalization as we have seen. Though bulk of our trade is with the U.S., which is quite good for us, but because of the complex nature of the supply chains, the global nature of the supply chains, if Asia sneezes, we catch the cold. And the supply chain management, the supply chain that has to work seamlessly across the world is very important both for Canada and the U.S. for our trade going forward. Has the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association, as it looked at what happened during the pandemic, how it affected the supply chains, and if we have, say, another pandemic hitting us in the next month, do you exactly know which are the members of yours, which are the major companies of yours, or which are the major product lines which get affected, and what needs to be done?
Well, thank you for the question. So the short answer is yes. We are constantly examining, as I mentioned, the geopolitical, environmental, and technological environment in which all of our members are manufacturing in and that our supply chains are adjusting to. In terms of Canada, U.S., and the border, I think a number of challenging lessons were learned, not just for the private sector, but for governments and other partners alike. Maybe our fear is that some of those lessons might get forgotten. I think of how certain procurements and project approvals and other decisions that were made with public-private collaboration were done in a fairly expeditious manner.
I understand. Sorry to interrupt. I got limited time. Are there any specific things that you have identified that would affect major product lines of your members' companies if pandemic is repeated?
Anything that seizes up the border, anything that creates any delay at the border will in fact impact all of our members. So, when we consider a future event such as that, anything that slows up the border in any way impacts all of our members. So it's conducive on, the nature of which businesses can be open and in what way would obviously impact our members, but really ensuring the border continues to be open and seamless is the single most important.
Mr. Holmes and Mr. Gay, the same thing. I'm talking about the global supply chains, where whether components or parts or the goods are supplied from China or Southeast Asian countries. If there's a disruption, how your members are going to get affected? Do you have an idea? Any particular study has been done?
I think, kind of to answer the that question, maybe going into a little bit more detail of we just can't simply have the one path to get goods to market. So we have a big country. We have the ability to go east and west. I think that, and for that matter, as climate starts to warm in the north, I think exploring an Arctic gateway strategy to make sure that we can get goods out no matter which way. So if we have, for example, a strike on Canada's west coast, if we have, say, flooding taking place where we simply can't move, the ability to ensure that goods continue to move, I think, is a massive piece that we need. But I'll kind of say, in addition to that, looking at the controls that government has and the leadership that government can play, things like interprovincial trade barriers.
You did touch upon the need to respond to IRA. We did do a study in this committee, and one of the witnesses very neatly said that we can't match dollar to dollar, but we can respond smartly to the U.S. The U.S. IRA and the Science and Chips Act, etc. One thing that has come out of that is that U.S. understands not everything can be manufactured in-house. Onshoring is not possible. That's the reason why they are trying to de-risk the dependence on China through friendshoring or nearshoring, etc. Have you guys identified the opportunities that is available for Canada? You guys may know that Canada and US have got a supply chain working group which identifies the various sectors, critical sectors where we can act jointly and where is that we can cooperate with each other. So have you looked into that and identify the sectors which provides opportunities for Canada to step in?
Vous avez 20 secondes.
You have 20 seconds.
To be very brief then, there's my mic. Two things. One, we have to diversify our trade, of course, always. And so both in terms of our infrastructure, but also our trade relationships, that's profoundly important. Secondly, 3/4 of our trade is with the U.S., and we need to really make sure that we're focused on those critical trade relationships. And critical minerals is actually a great example of that, where we're nearshoring and friendshoring, and we need to ensure that there's a rigorous ecosystem here in North America that's done in coordination.
Merci, M. Holmes. Merci, M. Aria. Ben là, c'est...
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Mr. Aria. It's my turn now for 6 minutes. Ms. Campbell, you were referring to CUSMA in your remarks. We know that there are a number of negotiations underway with a number of countries, Ecuador, the UK, ASEAN countries as well. I think it might be on the short to medium term. Can you tell us what the concerns and priorities should be for the negotiators?
Thank you very much. I feel like the priorities for the negotiator should obviously be to make the application of the trade agreement as simple as possible. We've talked about, and I've heard previously in the committee, that people aren't really using the free trade agreements because they're very hard to execute on. So that would, to me, be the simplest. We say free trade, but when you actually dig into it and actually have to use it in order to make sure that you qualify, it's a very technical, complicated, and confusing exercise for importers and exporters. So that would be my biggest recommendation, is to try and make this as easy as possible to execute on.
Merci.
Thank you. I have a question for the exporters, Canadian exporters. On a couple of occasions in a pre-budget brief in 2019, you were referring to the creation of a national program, accelerator for the exporters of manufacturing goods that would be similar to what exists in the technological field, technological accelerators. Was that something that was responded to? There might not be a program like that. I don't think that's been implemented. Would there be something with the same goals that could be implemented?
I think that one was for us. I mean, the short answer is yes, to an extent, in the sense there are a number of current government initiatives and programs that are focused on advanced manufacturing, clean technology, exports, and how to build our capacity to access those markets. Everything has shifted, as we've noted, significantly since the introduction of the IRA. At the present moment, our focus is on the investment tax credits, which are of extreme importance to our members to foreign direct investment. When we think of North American supply chains, decisions are being made every day about where to invest, and there is a manufacturing factory boom happening in the U.S. Manufacturing construction is up 70% year over year in the U.S., and so we've focused all of our energy in the last 12 to 18 months on matching, keeping up with, and finding Canada's response, unique response to the IRA incentives.
Je vais profiter du fait que vous avez parlé de...
You were referring to the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'll get back to that point, actually. There's a Canada-U.S. working group in a report from June 2022 referred to the significance for Americans and Canadians to work with, to engage in nearshoring in certain areas that are critical, specifically with respect to electric vehicles. Under this IRA, they're very focused on the environmental transitions. The Americans have implemented a number of initiatives that foster investment. Do you feel Canada is doing enough on its side?
First, your point is exactly right, but it's not just a clean technology issue. It is a geopolitical issue. And we've seen comments from the U.S. National Security Advisor talking about how the nature of global change is fundamentally changed under this administration and frankly, will be for future administrations. So Canada has worked closely with us and has taken a number of our recommendations on what Canada's response to the IRA should be. As I mentioned, our focus is really on the investment tax credits. We need to get those available for companies to apply for so that opportunities are not missed out on. I think the difference, and the importance of those is that Canada and the U.S. Are not traditional trading partners like we would think of in other markets where it's often competing for market access. Our integrated supply chains mean we build things together. So it is really about working together and how we as a region, as a continent, can export to the rest of the world.
Non, une minute 30 secondes. Alors,
Okay, just a few seconds. Mr. Martel is constantly interrupting me when I have work to do here. Sir, you were saying that it was a geopolitical consideration and even geostrategic. I'm not exactly sure of the word you used, but could you develop that point a bit further?
I referenced the U.S. National Security Advisor. I'll actually read his quote directly, which is he said, "Market access has been the orthodoxy of trade policy for 30 years, and that no longer fits today's challenges." So it's not just the economics, it's now the security of supply chains. And so for a number of strategic reasons, this implies a significant decoupling between the United States and China. And economic security has once again become an integral part of national security. So given our location, given the value of our trade with the U.S., how we work closely with our friends and partners in the U.S., how we respond to their incentives, and how we recognize this decoupling and ensure that it is Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, it is North America, exporting to and building and making products here in this region in highly integrated supply chains.
merci. Alors, c'était tout pour...
Thank you. That's it for my turn. Mr. Cannings, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start with Mr. Guy. You mentioned Bill C-58, the bill that would ban replacement workers in federally regulated industries, and you intimated that places that had banned replacement workers would have longer strikes, more disruptive, less stable, when in fact the longest, bitterest, worst strikes in Canadian history are generally those that involve replacement workers, because they take away the need for the employer to even talk to the workers. And this whole bill is designed to basically level the playing field, make things more stable. And British Columbia has had this legislation for decades. Quebec has had this legislation. We heard at an earlier meeting of this committee that when we were studying the Vancouver port strike, the last Vancouver port strike was over 50 years ago. It's not like British Columbia is a rampant place for strikes. And part of that is because they have the same legislation in the provincial jurisdiction that we're proposing for the federal jurisdiction. So I'm just wondering where you get this idea that banning replacement workers would make strikes last longer, happen more often, when really they're simply designed, this legislation is designed to give workers the same rights that employers have. And those disputes tend to be solved quicker because both the workers and the employers have their minds fixed and focused on finding a solution.
So I think really reading C-58, it firmly tips the power in favor of one of the parties. Where do I get the piece? I'll kind of cite the passage from the government's own consultation paper, which states the majority of these studies suggest that when a province prohibits replacement workers, this is associated with more frequent strikes and lockouts in at least some of the sectors. So I'm citing the government's own consultation paper when we say that this is going to cause problems, and to be honest with you, our members are super worried. I think when we take a look at what replacement workers are, it's often managers who are really keeping the lights on for our economy.
Well, in many cases it's not. It's people bringing in real replacement workers to do the work that large numbers of workers normally have. And if you're seeing increased lockouts, well, that's not a decision of workers. It just strikes me that this demonization of legislation that creates a level playing field makes people forget that labor disputes have two sides. Whenever there's a labor dispute, whether it's a lockout or a strike, I get the feeling everybody's blaming the workers, as they did in the Vancouver port strike. And yet we heard testimony here that a lot of the delays in that negotiation process there, the reason it took so long, was more a result of the structure of the employer's bargaining process than that of the workers. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I just can't let that lie because I don't know where you're getting that data. If there's more frequent strikes, maybe that's because workers feel that they have those powers, and they deserve, fair wages. They deserve a safe working place, and that's what we hear they're going after. So I'll leave it there. But and the same, Mr. Greer made the same point, and I believe that those are simply beliefs that aren't really, certainly from the British Columbia experience, not rooted in fact. And so I just want to turn to Mr. Whalen. On the other side, you said one of the big problems was the labor shortage. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that, where that labor shortage is concentrated, or what sectors are facing that and what needs to be done.
We'll also defer to Martin as well when we follow up on this, but from my perspective, we look at it that the, excuse me, we're seeing the labour shortage as far as the skilled labour shortage within supply chain is across all sectors, in private and in public. We're just seeing it right across the board. It's something that has not been highly promoted, and we work towards getting that increased advocacy and getting the training back towards it. Martin can probably identify a little more closely the specific sectors where we're seeing the worst of it, but certainly in the manufacturing area and the transportation areas are two key areas for us. Martin.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the question, and it is a key one that others had brought up in this discussion. The big thing is that we recognize through our members across Canada and the organizations that we deal with is that although it appears to be a labor shortage, and you brought that up, Cannings, that we see it as a skill shortage. So as when I was Assistant Deputy Minister for Supply Chain in the province of Manitoba, I put out some jobs, and I got lots of applicants, but the applicants...
Monsieur Montati, malheureusement, il ne vous reste que 10 secondes pour conclure. Monsieur de Montati, vous pouvez conclure. Vous avez 10 secondes.
Sorry, did you want me to continue?
Hi, Mr. Montanti. If you would like to access interpretation, there should be a little button at the bottom of your screen, but you have 10
Yeah, it's
seconds.
there. It says English, but
Okay.
yeah. Thank you. Yes. So just to continue on the question is we need to be bringing we talked about immigration in our papers. We talked about the current skills shortage in Canadians as well. We need to start recognizing the gaps that people have when they apply for these jobs, and then we need to fill those gaps in. And this is predominant throughout, like Mr. Whalen said, all sectors of industries across Canada.
Merci, Monsieur Montati.
Thank you.
Alors,
Thank you, sir. We'll be starting now second round of questions. I'll start with Mr. Martel. You have 5 minutes. It's your turn, actually, this time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I thank you for being here with us. Madam Campbell, I'd like to know, in the free trade agreements, standards reciprocity is an issue often. It doesn't seem to make everyone happy. Can you tell us if there is anything to be done about that or what you think of that?
So could you rephrase the question? Are you asking if we feel that we're not getting the same equivalent benefits back on free trade agreements that we are signing?
Often, when our exports get to another country, the standards are different after these free trade agreements, whereas these other countries can bring a lot of things to Canada here, whereas we can't send over there. That's what I'm gathering. Are you understanding? Are you hearing the same thing?
I now understand the question. Thank you fully. But yes, I feel it could go both ways, though, too. I'm sure that we've also been told that in Canada as well. So to me, it's a continued dialogue around the free trade agreements. That's why we're so interested with even the CUSMA provision that encourage trade and facilitation committees, and there's other committees around that. But the private sector is not participating in those committees. So that, to me, is where those things should be vetted and worked through, and we're just not party to those conversations.
Thank you, Madam Campbell. We're hearing that an improvement in the customs issue is a major challenge, and that actually slows things down going through the border. Is there something that needs to be done in that respect to have greater flexibility, to modernize things? It looks really quite complicated and really rigid when you look at this whole system.
Thank you very much. I would agree. I think there's two things to say. One is we used to be a world-class customs agency, and we're ranked quite high back in 2017. And over the years, we have digressed down that path. Again, it comes back to some of the discussions we've had earlier with my esteemed colleagues. We need overarching plans, and we don't have one of those, even on the border processes. So to me, that's part of it. Not only do we not have this plan where we talk about do an EV, take Canada to the next level, same with the border as well. We've been asking the senior leadership there for quite a while to provide a strategic plan. We don't have one. I personally asked an EVP last year when we could expect to get one. He said in 18 months. We're at that 18-month marker. But to your point, the processes are very complicated, confusing, and this is why we really feel it's important to have an interagency council that would include business to start addressing these things wholly.
My next question is for Mr. Home or Mr. Guy. If you engage in nearshoring, is that there's an issue. At this point, the Canada West Foundation is saying that confidence in our transport infrastructure has fallen in the last decade. I'd like to know, why is it that there's been such a decline in our infrastructures?
I think the fact that we need stable supply chains really to get goods to market. So when we look at what the Canada West Foundation, and we're very much supportive of it, and I'll stress, not only are we supportive of it, but we encourage premiers who this summer actually mentioned that the federal government should be looking at this Canadian transportation infrastructure plan. But we need the ability to get those goods like critical minerals, or like my colleague was talking about, the agricultural products, to port, to market reliably. And I think the issue that we're seeing right now is that there's not necessarily that climate, there's not necessarily the understanding from business as to what the government strategy is with some of its programs. So I'll kind of say the National Trade Corridors funds were very supportive of it, but I think ensuring that there's that vision that goes along with that program, so business can understand the important pieces that they can invest in too, because we as business are actually responsible for a lot of the infrastructure as well.
Thank you. I'm just curious, what infrastructure at that border needs to be improved the most? Unfortunately, says the chair, we won't have an opportunity to hear the answer to that, Mr. Martel. Thank you for your comment or your question. Madame Fortier, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for being here, and I appreciated your opening remarks and wanted to commend the Chamber of Commerce mentioning that regulatory framework or regulatory modernization is really important, reducing the red tape. And funny enough, S6 is still on the table in the House, and hopefully my members will understand that we should be pushing this, as it would help businesses to be able to continue to reduce the red tape. I had the privilege of being the president of the Treasury Board, and that was a bill that I presented. And I think that it's really important that we focus on solutions that are already on the table and to continue on that. So I just wanted to mention to my colleagues, when it comes up, let's hope we can support businesses by applying this and voting for S6. Currently, the second modernization, regulatory modernization, has 45 amendments to 28 pieces of legislation. So it really, really could help many of our businesses in the support of innovation and economic growth. My next question would be to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, where in previous appearance it was discussed that the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act and both the opportunities and challenges it presented to Canadian companies, particularly in the clean tech sector. It's obvious that pretending climate change doesn't exist is no longer a viable option for countries that want to remain economically competitive in the 21st century. So could you please speak on how the investment tax credits provided to Canadian clean tech firms are helping Canadian firms compete, and how we can strengthen that?
And thank you as well for the kind words. So on the investment tax credits, the ITCs within Budget 2023, I wouldn't say that they're currently helping. I think it's premature. But what they're doing is they're helping to retain investment in Canada and putting some certainty in place for the business community. These are major projects. If you're talking about carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects, these are major builds. They will take an incredible amount of private sector investment. And what the business community is looking for from the government is a sense that there is conviction and certainty ahead, that there will be investments for that there will be tax credits that make this jurisdiction in Canada a competitive one. The IRA in the United States has had an incredible sucking sound for investment, and it's brought all kinds of projects to the U.S. territory. What follows that is talent, and what follows that is research and investment. And that cycle that it creates could have a long-term and prohibitively or disastrous impact on us here in Canada, in our energy sector, and in our net zero climate transition.
Great, thank you very much. Now, for all of the les witnesses. I will turn to French because I want to do both official languages. Alors, si vous pourriez...
If you could answer this question. So most of us would agree that the government has a role to play in giving Canadian companies the tools they need in order to develop, export, and fit within the global supply chains. And you know that there is a wide array of programs available throughout all levels of government, orders of government, to assist. How can we be sure that these different various orders of government do work collaboratively to help our exporters? How can we ensure that we streamline the services that are made available to these businesses and our exporters? Mr. Whelan first, and then perhaps everyone can have an opportunity to answer quickly, briefly. You have 35 seconds, says the chair. Perhaps you can submit your ideas in writing later. Mr. Whelan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, very quickly. For us, it is the skill set that's a vacuum across the country and across all sectors. Once the programs and so forth are in place, we can deliver on them, and we can deliver the training for them. Quickly.
I think keeping it short, I would just say leadership. I think that plays a massive piece. So take a look at the Asia Pacific Gateway Strategy as an example. That brought together all levels of government, communities, provincial governments, indigenous populations, at identifying what are the top projects that we need to ensure that we can grow our exports into the Indo-Pacific. And I think that was a successful program.
Merci, Monsieur Guy. C'est maintenant mon tour.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. It's my turn again now. My question is for the Chamber of Commerce. The council or the board on the Canadian industry group suggested an industrial major shift in this area, and there was adoption of an approach that would be inspired by industries like China and Germany. They identified aerospace as one of the 4 manufacturing sectors that were a priority. What do you think the main priorities are for this essential sector?
Specifically? Well, I think our friends at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters may have an opinion on that, but the critical piece for the aerospace sector right now, I think, is ensuring that there is a robust ecosystem in place here in Canada. These are very integrated markets. These are global markets. They are reliant on essential skills and talent here in Canada, and they need those supply chains. They're sending engines and component parts to various jurisdictions. They're supporting rigorous supply chains and value chains that are global in nature. And so our domestic players here need to have a clear sense of what are the rules of engagement with the government here so that they can have a fair shot at playing with this government and in procurement. They also need to have a free flow of goods and talent that they can then take advantage of global opportunities.
Monsieur Greer, en 50 secondes.
Mr. Greer, you have 50 seconds for that answer.
Sure. Just very quickly, I know our friends in the Aerospace Industries Association have been on the Hill and will be on the Hill recently talking about the need for a national aerospace strategy, and I think they have some very strong recommendations for you and this committee to consider. And I would also just echo what Mr. Holmes said around clarity around procurement and purchasing decisions that are made by the Government of Canada. It is one of the most challenging files for any government and for industry to navigate, but I know for the aerospace sector in particular, making sure that made in Canadian products and components and parts can be effectively sold to support the Government of Canada's national security, commercial, and other objectives.
Absolument, merci. Je passe maintenant.
Absolutely, thank you. Mr. Cannings, you have 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to start this time with Mr. Whelan talking about supply chains. It seems over the past decades, supply chains have been moving to the just-in-time model, and now that seems to be getting increasingly disrupted by storms, fires, rail issues, whatever, and someone here, I'm not sure who it was, said that those disruptions, 60%, I guess it was the chamber, said 60% of their members feel that is not going to improve. I'm just wondering if your members have any sense of how they are going to adapt to this because of, especially with Canada-U.S. Supply chains, how integrated they are. How does that work?
From our perspective, we'll look at it that the just-in-time is certainly a model that was well in play when everything ran like clockwork. And I think that you saw a prime example of how clockwork goes aside when you have something like the pandemic which struck in 2020, excuse me, and healthcare supplies that had always been planned out just so long because you could plan that very well, all of a sudden had huge increased demands. So something like that can throw a monkey wrench into and a disruption into any supply chain quite quickly. So when things are flowing fine, just-in-time works. When it's not, we see the need to have additional flows available to us and additional people ready to deal with those flows and the supply chain issues that come around it.
Ms. Campbell,
yeah, I would love to jump in. Yeah, I think our members certainly have done a lot of great contingency planning over the last couple of years and continue to do so. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for government and private sector to work together in terms of disruption and how that might look and feel as we move forward. I think we were really good at dealing with a very stressful situation across many fronts, but we've been not good at doing desktop or tabletop exercises since then. So that's in our DNA that when these happen, we know exactly what sheet to go to, what policy to follow. That still is an opportunity for us with business and government. And I can tell you right now on the U.S. side as well, I think there is an opportunity there to make sure we work collectively, because when the BC floods happened, we had to go to U.S. Customs. They were very gracious. They reacted very quickly, made those changes. We don't have that same reciprocal program here on the Canadian side, if they should be in the same position.
Merci. Il vous reste 15 secondes.
Thank you. Actually, I thought you had 15 seconds. No, actually, sorry, your time is up, actually. Mr. Baldonelli, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And like my previous colleagues, I was reviewing the National Supply Chain Task Force report. And for me, in my particular riding, it mentions in 2020 road transportation accounted for 50% of Canada's merchandise trade, imports, exports combined. In my riding alone, I've got 4 international border crossings, 2 of the top 4 in Canada in terms of commercial traffic. I think the Peace Bridge alone is number 2, and $40 billion worth of trade goes over that one bridge alone. So it's kind of timely that we're undertaking this study, you know, and part of the study talks about identifying programs, tools, and measures that support growth. Ms. Campbell, you talked about, you know, the National Transportation Study talks about digitization. And in your presentation, you talked about the CARM program. I worry sometimes, you know, government programs can be an impediment rather than a help. And I think it's important that you speak to some of the concerns from your organization of importers and exporters to the implementation of CARM and, you know, this drop-dead date of implementation and what that could mean for our supply chains and in our trade.
Thank you very much for the question. And that for sure is our number one concern right now as May 13 is fast approaching. Based on what we know right now, and I did submit to the clerk some stats, we know that we'll take customs numbers that was submitted to this committee back in May, that there's 200,000 registered importers. As of yesterday, they shared with us just under 50,000 importers are registered today, and they are expecting 100% for May 13th. For those importers that aren't registered, their goods will not be allowed across the border. So initially one thinks, okay, those people didn't register, they won't be allowed across the border, but what the implication is, those trucks will be turned around. Those goods will have to be offloaded into warehouses. And so that is the biggest concern for us right now, this mandatory drop dead and this implication of everyone having to be registered. The other big overarching issue for us is this technology has not been tested. We've asked, you know, for 6 years this project's been on the table. Many times it has been said Big Bang is too risky, yet they've doubled down and continued down that path. And so on May 13th, not only will be having all these new requirements, but we'll be testing technology that we've never touched before. The other very scary part about the story is there's only a few people that are actually testing. Out of those 200,000 importers, only 47 companies are actually testing the system. So when we go live on May 13th, all of us will be seeing it for the first time.
I mean, given, the government's track record and success at, programs such as the Phoenix Pay system, you would hope that they would try to run maybe a parallel system, say for a month, 2 months, just to ensure that it works, and then you could drop the other system and you can go forward. But that doesn't seem to be the case, and we do so at our peril. You talked about you're hearing some. Have they shared any of the test results with your organization?
We had an update yesterday. I can tell you that there are, what they tell us, the numbers change all the time. So based on what they told us yesterday, there's 25 entities they expect that represent 90% of importers in terms of the software interface. Every single one of these have to be recertified under this new program. As of yesterday, there's only one that has been certified. Mm-hmm.
My understanding is part of this program is that the concern among small operators and them having to obtain their own surety bonds. And there's some confusion out there whether or not they'll even be able to obtain surety bonds instead of using the regular brokerage industry for such things. Is that a concern that you're hearing as well?
It's a massively big concern, and it's a very bona fide concern. So right now, today, most of those things transpire on a customs broker bond. So that's probably 300 companies in total. We will now forcing 200,000 importers to get their own bond. Again, magically, one day, May 13th, it's supposed to be in place. They have given a grace period, in all fairness to them, but we've recently learned that grace period is only extended to the ones that have signed onto the portal. So that's still 150,000 that haven't. But the bigger part of the story, too, in my opinion, is right now, small, medium enterprises can carry a $5,000 bond. That exists today. For some reason, not known to really anyone, they have increased that minimum now to $25,000. So a lot of people will not be able to get that surety, as you point out, because the surety associations or the surety companies doing that are going to maybe not risk them, are going to risk them in a category that's too risky, and they won't provide the bond. So somehow we've gone from a big $20,000 jump there. Customs will say, well, they can put down a cash bond. But for those ones that don't meet the surety, they have to do 100%. Yeah. And so that's not feasible either. Yeah.
So, I mean, for the Canadian Chamber, your members would have some concerns on that, right? In terms of CBSA staffing, your experience.
Nous n'avons plus le temps, Monsieur Maldinelli, je suis désolé.
Your time is up, sir.
Je passe maintenant la parole.
Mr. Sidhu, you have 7 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for joining us here today. As you guys all know, in the city of Brampton, it's a supply chain hub of Canada. Many different industries. Trade has an impact on so many of my constituents, our residents in Brampton. 1 in 5 jobs are impacted directly or indirectly by trade, whether that's in Brampton or across Canada. And so it's this government that's making the critical investments, whether you're talking about CPTPP, we signed CITA, we signed the new CUSMA, and many other initiatives. In terms of infrastructure investments, we can speak about the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is a very important corridor, as we all know. Trade with the U.S. is at an all-time high of, I think, $1.3 trillion now, and so that's a record. And we'll continue investing in infrastructure out in BC. We've approved the expansion of the port in Delta, which will help increase trade by about 60% at that port alone. And so these are very important issues that our government remains focused on, especially those, in my riding and across Canada. I really want to turn over to some of my recent travels to Calgary, Kelowna, and Montreal, where I met with representatives from the regional airport, the municipality, the Chamber of Commerce, and business owners. And I'd like to know, because you guys represent members across the country, is there certain trends or challenges in certain parts of the country that you're not seeing in the other parts of the country? Maybe we can start with Mr. Holmes.
My colleague actually may be more appropriate to this one, given his file specialty. Thank you.
Yeah, so from a Western Canadian perspective, I think very much the issues that we're hearing, transportation, just being able to get goods to market reliably, the natural resources, again, not only getting the resources, but actually being able to get the permitting to start, mining the critical minerals, getting the value chain pieces up and running so that we're not just necessarily shipping our critical minerals out of the country, that we're actually building them in here. And it's the agriculture. I think the agriculture piece is from a Western Canadian perspective, a massive piece that has a lot of potential to grow the economy, especially if we were to look at things like that value chain and building the pieces here in Canada.
Thank you. And maybe Ms. Campbell?
I have much more to add in terms of what was just stated there, other than we are continued to be challenged with the onslaught of regulation and pending border disruption.
You did mention there's a grace period for importers. I don't know if that's if you register by March and it's 6 months, so you don't have to get a bond. You can still continue on the custom broker's bond.
May 13th is drop dead, so everyone will have to face that May 13th. The only exception is they won't necessarily have to have their financial security in place for 6 months if they've signed on to the portal.
And what date is that? If they sign
May 13th.
So as long as they sign on by May 13th, they have a 6-month grace period where they don't have to get the financial security and they can continue working with their broker. So you have an additional 6 months of flexibility.
Correct. If you've signed on. Otherwise, you have to put in a paper entry and pay duties and taxes at the border.
Yeah. Signing on, it's a few steps, but I think we should encourage importers to sign on.
We 100% have, and that's part of the journey as well. I have provided stats to the clerk. We are only seeing 2,000 a month, so there's obviously a problem. One, I think it's twofold. One is how difficult it is to get on there, and number two is the lack of communication from CBSA. I would encourage you or your staff to take a look at their website right now. You would have no idea that's happening.
No, and thank you for that. I've heard from members in terms of awareness, and I think we do need to continue working with industry partners to get more awareness out on this new system. Because when I was in Washington for APEP, we were discussing supply chains and customs regulations, and a lot of the folks there were looking to Canada saying, how are you doing this so well? Because there's countries in South America that cannot trade with each other as easy as we do with our neighbors. And so people are looking into Canada and some of our regulations and some of our techniques, but there's always room for improvement. We all know that. Turning to Ryan, sorry, would you like to speak to kind of some of the regional challenges that you're seeing across the country?
50 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Sure. Just to echo some of what Mr. Guy said, we're hearing a lot around agri-food processing, energy. There's some concerns around grid and electricity, concerns out west around inputs for manufacturers. But what I'm actually struck by is the commonality of changes. Despite the difference in industries, despite the differences and challenges amongst our different geographies, some of the themes we've discussed here around regulatory approvals and timeliness and reform and transportation infrastructure. There's no part of the country that we're not hearing concerns about export, trade-enabling infrastructure, and the need for sustained strategic investment.
Merci, Monsieur Sidou. Alors...
Thank you, Mr. Sidou. Now we're moving to the third round with Mr. Van Bopta. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here with us. I have a question for the Chamber of Commerce, and it's really a follow-up question of Mr. Canning's about just-in-time inventory controls. My riding is in the Lower Mainland, Langley, and it's a border crossing in Aldergrove, between Aldergrove and Lyndon, Washington. And there's a lot of light manufacturing going on in my riding. I talked to a lot of them. And they have a problem with supply chain disruptions, which are impacting their inventory management. And just-in-time inventory management is a challenge for them. And it's hitting these people in 3 ways. There's more working capital tied up in inventory. Number 2, there's more working capital tied up in warehousing. And warehousing is very, very expensive in the Lower Mainland. And thirdly, with high interest rates, there's a lot more money taken off the bottom line in financing all this additional working capital. So my question to the Chamber is, are you hearing this from your members, and what advice would you have for small and medium-sized operators?
So, yes, we are. We are hearing about this, and I think that speaks to the statistics that were shared that we've been seeing the survey on business conditions. That there's ongoing concern about inflation and then the cost of debt management for a lot of these companies, particularly small and medium enterprise, but also persistently this lack of confidence in the supply chain itself. And that comes out of the long tail of the pandemic and the disruptions we've seen throughout that period, but it's still very much with them. And so even though we talk about the importance and the rigor of creating more ecosystems within the Canadian manufacturing sector, creating maybe more integrated domestic supply chains. Regardless, we need both. We need, those have a lot of benefits and knock-on effects that are positive for our economy, but we also will always, in our current frame, be reliant on components, on parts, and on sometimes even talent that needs to come in and work with our Canadian manufacturers and suppliers. So we do need both. We need borders that can be porous and rigorous in their controls, but porous in their application for our business community here at home.
Thank you. One question that I'm hearing from small operators with these supply chain problems is, should they be making long-term investments in more warehousing? A lot of them have become very, very efficient with their inventory management. And early on in the pandemic, when we saw some inflation creeping in, the government was telling us these are short-term pandemic-related supply chain challenges. And today the government is saying, well, no, maybe it's more deeply embedded than that. And small business operators don't know, they're getting these confused signals from the government. So what advice would you have?
So a couple of things. One, we have a variety of ways we could approach this. There is benefits to automation, and artificial intelligence do provide some future options around increased productivity and the automation and the benefits that many businesses of various scales can introduce and benefit from quickly. So the Chamber of Commerce is continuing to study that. We feel strongly that there's a lot of potential there as we see a declining productivity rate in Canada. I think there's ways from a warehousing perspective that's an obvious place that we can improve on. I hear you on the cost of land and on the price pressures that are facing these businesses. In many cases, they can only grow up. I think what we consistently see is that government, one of its main tools, of course, is regulation. We don't often see governments take back or repeal regulation or apply an economic lens. And so what we're calling for consistently across multiple sectors within our membership is that when new regulations are introduced, they're put through an economic lens to see what are the impacts on businesses of all scales across the country amongst various sectors, and will that be net positive or negative for the Canadian economy? We think that would have a profound difference.
Yeah, and just a simple thing. I mean, it can't take us 10 years to build projects in the country. Figuring out that regulatory problem so that we can actually build the infrastructure that we need quickly, so that we're right now we're looking at those near-term problems that are already taking place. We're already so far behind that's not good enough. We have to be looking at 20 to 30 years out to make sure that when we get to that, we have the infrastructure in place so that we can get those minerals to market. We can get those goods reliably to market.
Merci, Monsieur Guy. Et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. Mr. Miao, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I understand during your remark from the Chamber of Commerce, you mentioned about the National Trade Corridor Fund. And in my riding of Richmond Center, it's really a first point of destination through air travel and goods coming from the Pacific. Many forwarder businesses are critical in this supply chain system. I'd like to understand how would an investment like the recent announcement that was done by our Minister of Transport with approximately $74.3 million to integrate and expand the Vancouver International Airport would impact businesses and members of your organization across Canada?
So significant. I think that's the simple answer. I think the projects that are being announced by the government are greatly needed. We have an infrastructure deficit in the country, so the more money going in towards infrastructure, and that's from the private sector and from the government, is all very positive. I think making sure that We've got a vision in place so that we understand how that is working in addition to some other announcements that the government is working on. Will allow us to stretch those dollars significantly further. It's a signal then to the private sector as to what is needed from both the government's vision and from the private sector's vision.
Thank you. And I also like to understand more about, I completely agree with your vision about, how we plan for the future of Canada in the economic, growth, especially I personally feel there's a lot of potential for made in Canada goods to be a global player across internationally. And part of it, which Ms. Campbell, you talked about the CARM, which is the new management system that we are implementing in May. Would you feel this is an approach where our government is taking to modernize the current system? Because we talk about a lot of modernization in different area, and what is better when our technology in this generation allow us to really look at that approach and make the system more efficient and much more welcoming for all the exporters and importers to participate in this.
That's a great question. Thank you so much. I 100% would agree that it was an attempt to modernize, but I feel like it comes back to a little bit with the infrastructure discussion too, is there needs to be an overarching council or agency to make sure we're actually meeting the mandate. So that's a great example of where we thought we were modernizing, but nobody's been oversighting it. So we're years over budget. Is it actually doing what it says it was supposed to do? This is a third party as well. We've outsourced it, and I think that's something we need to take a look at to keep our assets within our own government potentially is something. So fair point. It's definitely an attempt at modernization, but the execution of it and did it actually meet its mandate, or is it going to meet its mandate is really the question.
And I can imagine, like, in the initial stage, there's going to be glitches, right? And how are we able to make that improvement over time? Also including participation of, businesses across Canada for their inputs, and how we can really maximize the potential of this management system that's being in place. Do you feel in certain area that our government can increase on certain, because I understand there is consultation being made in the past, and this is the phase where it's being implemented right now. Do you feel there's areas that we can find better solutions of the concerns that you or your members may be experiencing?
Yes, fair point. In fact, there actually has been 2 rounds of implementation already. That one of them was importer-facing, the other one was not. So we have seen some pieces of it. I think the question, though, or the opportunity and lesson learned is, we talked about this earlier, why did we have to do Big Bang? Why didn't we do an agile approach? And really, that's the lost opportunity. Most people around the table have done systems implementation, whether at the government and the private sector. Typically, that's what happened. You go through the design phase, you start the testing, you have your lessons learned, you rejig, then you implement, and you do your process improvement. That's not what we're experiencing here. That's what we've experienced on past projects. So that, I guess, is a lesson reinforced in this case. And we hope that once we move forward and get it in and stabilize, that we will have those iterative processes. We're just very concerned at what cost at this point, since we're going to go Big Bang on May 13th.
Great. Thank you for that.
Je vous remercie. C'est tout le temps que nous avons. C'est maintenant mon...
Thank you. That's all the time you have. It's my turn now. I'll get back to the Chamber of Commerce. You somewhat addressed the issue in one of your previous answers to my colleague, Mr. Miao. But you testified recently about the strike at the Vancouver port, and I think you addressed it somewhat or briefly. You were talking about the importance of government action in the areas of prevention and rapid resolution of strikes. Can you get back to that a little bit and expand, tell us to what extent the infrastructure at the port are essential or important at the port and are really a critical aspect?
I think business needs to have the stability and the reliability in the supply chains, and it's important to realize that looking forward, looking back, we obviously had our West Coast port strike, which had a significant impact on our supply chains, but also looking forward, the Port of Montreal This is more instability and more uncertainty for business, possibly with both national railways. Again, if one of those were to happen, the economic consequences of something like that, I think, would be massive. I think, kind of keeping in mind when we look at things like a strike, it means that there's a slowdown in production. So, for example, in the forestry or the mining sector, leading potash company Canpotex announced that they were withdrawing all offers of new sales, which was 70% of their exports. In essence, were about to stop. These aren't things that just necessarily affect the port. These are things that affect workers throughout the economy and throughout Canada.
So you're confirming then that ports would actually be underutilized as the potential real source and engine for the economy?
I think it's important to realize that our ports play a massive piece in our export economy. But I mean, so do airports, and so do our bridges going down to the United States. So I think it's and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but I think we need to make sure that we get our goods to market, and we need to make sure that, again, we're taking a look at the future to ensure that we've got the capacity to continue to get those goods out to market.
Merci. Je passe maintenant à Monsieur Can.
Thank you. Mr. Cannings, 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to continue down the line to Mr. Greer, the question I was asking last time about the just-in-time method of handling supply chains. I've been reading about how some companies are adjusting that strategy to make it a little more nimble, figuring out what, if you are getting parts in, which parts do you need to store to have on hand, which ones you can pretty much rely on. If you can comment on what you're hearing from your members in that regard.
Thank you. So we're hearing, I think, some of what you're hearing, which is that supply chains are highly elastic. We're not hearing our members are keeping as much inventory as they were sort of during and the immediate crunch post-pandemic, but they're not also going back to the way it was prior to the pandemic, where things were just in time. Honestly, what we're hearing most from them is some of what we're talking about today, which is, to the extent that we can ensure that we are investing in the trade and transportation infrastructure required to give them more predictability and certainty, they can make business decisions based on that. The other thing our members are looking a lot at is how they can implement new digital technologies to help them manage those inventory processes, including potential opportunities around artificial intelligence, which can optimize route planning for their goods, shipping volumes, predictive maintenance, safety monitoring. So there's opportunity to improve productivity and resilience, but it's going to require significant investments and significant capital investments, which means the business and investment environment needs to be conducive to that.
So I would assume then that small businesses and large businesses are looking at this in very different ways. I mean, if this all started with Toyota and they're shifting their strategy, but a mom and pop operation wouldn't have those resources.
That's exactly correct. The challenges are different. The ability to respond is different. That's why you have constituents who are talking about finding additional warehouse space. They need to build in the uncertainty. They have less flexibility than some of these larger multinationals or foreign direct investors, which means there's higher costs for them, and it has a greater impact on their business. It lowers the competitiveness, and it creates real challenges for them on their bottom line, which is why they are looking to take advantage of government programs, tax credits, and other things that can help them adopt some of these technologies and implement some of these processes to the extent possible, because it is a competitive disadvantage and one that costs them, their employees and their families dearly.
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, colleagues, and welcome, guests. Thank you very much. I want to start with what we're looking at here. I'll start with you, Mr. Whalen, because I've gone through the report on the supply chain, and there's a number of issues that are raised in there that need to be addressed, one of which, of course, is that the actual freight flow has gone down in every realm, rail, port, and road, but up in aviation from 2009 to 2022. So it's saying that aviation is being used more, but all our traditional infrastructure is being used less. Can you do you understand why that might be happening?
I'll say no. When we look at it from the timing perspectives, that could certainly drive a part of it. Driving into the depths of the report, I'm going to refer to Mr. Montanti if he's still there.
Yeah, no,
They've only got a little
question.
bit of time here, so okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's a great question, and I'll answer it quickly. The things that happened is lots of companies went to more of a horizontal approach and outsourced lots of items and you know, it changed the dynamics where things were coming into the marketplace as assemblies rather than as individual pieces and that. So
Okay,
that
okay, I'm going to move on, okay? Thank
yeah.
you. You take a look at some of our metallurgical, and it's been referred to here before in this committee, critical minerals, and the government has a strategy on critical minerals. I think it's an incomplete strategy. Nevertheless, you talk about how we ship out critical minerals. Let's talk about lithium. Lithium is produced at one mine right now in Canada and Manitoba. How does that get to the actual buyer, which is a Chinese company at this point in time? Can you explain how that goes from the Manitoba mine to China?
My understanding is that it's largely, well, there's the mining and then there's the refining as well, because there's a chemical process typically used. And then
I don't think the refining is open there yet. I think it's just a mine.
And then it's transported by rail to the West Coast.
Thank you. And yet the strategy, of course, is to use that all internally in Canada, according to the government's strategy here on how they build this supply chain for electric vehicles. And they've spent $135 billion on this, and yet the basic element isn't available to them at this point in time, correct?
I would say the full ecosystem, in order to have that finished product, is not yet here in Canada.
Okay. A lot in this report that you talked about, back to you, Mr. Whalen, was talking about collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. There was a time when the private sector would focus on opportunities and then the public sector would facilitate that investment. But that investment had to have the transparency of an outcome, both from a end result perspective, but also from a financial perspective. It seems this government has usurped that relationship, and they're picking winners and losers now, and actually trying to determine what goes there. Industry's sitting on their hands. As a matter of fact, in Q1 2023, it was reported that $212 billion of investment capital left Canada because of lack of transparency of outcome. So there's no money going into infrastructure in Canada because the opportunities aren't there until the government picks them. Are we going to continue to have a degradation of our infrastructure in Canada unless the government gets out of the way and allows industry to actually help making decisions about what we export, what we do in Canada for economic activity?
Again, from our perspective, we're dealing with the people who are within the supply chain and getting that there. Not really sure, to be honest with you, where the point
thank
is
you.
going.
Let's move to one last question here, and I'll leave it to anybody that wants to answer in the panel. The Impact Assessment Act has been ruled ultra-virus by the Federal Court of Canada, and as a result, it leaves another big uncertainty mark for businesses in Canada that want to invest in projects. Is this going to continue going on here, and how much capital are we actually going to have develop any of our infrastructure if this government continues to create uncertainty? Any comment, please?
Vous avez 10 secondes, alors soyez très synthétique.
You have 10 seconds. Be quick.
We say uncertainty is a poison pill to investment in the country.
Merci, c'était très efficace.
Thank you. That was very effective. Mr. Sidhu, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as many of our witnesses may know, Minister Ng and Minister Champagne are leading a renewed Team Canada engagement effort with the United States, working in collaboration with our ambassadors. We all know that supply chains between Canada and the United States is one of the most integrated supply chains in the world. I want to hear from some of you on what would you recommend to help improve North American supply chain and resilience. Feel free to.
I'll get us started and warmed up, I'm sure. The whole bench is ready to weigh in on that one. I think it's very important that we are taking the upcoming election and the potential for CUSMA renewal very seriously. And I think it's important that the Prime Minister made that announcement. What I would say, though, is this is if it's truly a Team Canada, it needs to be a full bench. So it needs to have everyone involved, as we have done as a country previously in such situations and across multiple governments. We need to see the appointing of, in my opinion, across multiple parties, some leaders and champions to represent Canadian interests who can speak to governors in individual states. We need to mobilize the business community to go down to the United States, talk to their supply chain, and ensure that conversation and that trade relationship is fresh and very apparent to all parts of that. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce today has announced some of our programming that we will be putting in place this year. We'll be doing a minimum of 4 trips down to the United States with our members around certain core industries and member sectors to ensure that we're speaking directly to policymakers, that we're bringing businesses down to have B2B conversations as well. So that's our contribution, but we hope and expect that other businesses, other sectors, and the full government will participate.
I'm running out of time, but I want to share remaining of my time with my colleague here.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation. And we've talked about a lot of the different supply chains that are currently in place. One thing I would like to ask about is a supply chain related to the auto sector. I'm an Ontario MP from Northern Ontario, from a steel town. You know, and the whole greening up of the car industry, led by many of the various folks, and currently now we're looking at another one, Honda, which would hopefully be located somewhere in Canada. Through you, Chair, to our presenters, and it could be the supply chain Canada folks or anybody else that wants to, you know, observations of why we've been successful and what we ought to continue to do to continue to land those deals in Canada for that important supply chain around the auto industry that Sault Ste. Marie and the steel industry in Canada is part of. Thank you.
Happy to jump in. We've been tremendously encouraged by these announcements from Volkswagen, Stellantis, Northvolt, and of course the rumors, as you mentioned, of Honda. Really, this is a moment, especially on considering some of the investments happening south of the border, for the Government of Canada to be bold, to be working with its provincial municipal partners to ensure that these opportunities come to Canada, because these are not investment decisions that will impact any region or our economy, our supply chains for years. It will be decades. And so now is the time to be bold. In terms of continuing them, in terms of ensuring that we are successful, a couple of things. First, it's not just the investment, it's all of the supporting factors that will make these projects successful. So ensuring the availability of skilled labor, ensuring that the transportation infrastructure to support the supply chain flows is adequate. All of these things matter, as well as the regulatory environment. There is a lot of private investment that is making decisions on where to invest that is not connected specifically to Government of Canada or provincial investments, but they are doing it based on certainty and on regulatory issues. So it's really taking a holistic view. It's how you marry strategic investments with all of those other things to make sure that projects big and small find their way into all regions of this country and communities across this province and the rest of them for decades to come.
I wouldn't mind jumping in because I think this is a really great example of where the auto sector has done great work with the government in terms of facilitating trade. And there is a special program Customs has put in place called Customs Self-Assessment. And we can't live without that, in our opinion. That one, again, is going to be impacted by CARM. So I feel like that one is a great one, a great shining beacon, yet somehow we're not going to maybe necessarily keep that same program, and it would be a very big lost opportunity if that is impacted.
Merci, Madame Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Campbell. We are done the third turn. I'd like to ask committee members, would you like us to move to a next round, or should we cut things short at this point?
Votre côté,
Would you like us to close the meeting, end the meeting?
Would you like to continue? Sure. Vous souhaitez continuer? Oui.
You'd like to keep going? Okay. All right, so we'll start with another round. On your side, who would like to speak?
The panel, a couple more questions?
Monsieur Baldinelli, donc, dans...
Mr. Baldinelli will start with a turn of 5 minutes. 5 minutes for you.
Ms. Campbell, if I could follow up from our previous questions, I was just going to ask in terms of, with your extensive background with CBSA and some of the issues that we find at our border crossings in terms of staffing, and what are you hearing about the staffing complements that are there now, and are they adequate to service the needs that we're facing?
I feel like generally at the ports, things seems to be operating well. I think what we've been challenged with over the years is perhaps the team that has been charged to manage CBSA. We've seen most of them, probably in the last 10 years, have come from outside of the agency. And recently, we definitely have seen folks coming in from the tax side. So I feel like that's been part of the challenges. We're trying to make it a tax regime, not understanding how dynamic and important the border is. And so that's definitely been a challenge that we would reflect upon.
Border delays need to be considered when we're talking about supply chains, and they're quite extensive at sometimes in our area in particular. So we need to address that, and staffing shortages are part of that. If I could go on to Mr. Whalen, I was just looking through the National Supply Chain Task Force report, and as part of that, there were some recommendations and timings were required, and some of them were in terms of being immediate requests of the government. And there was the one with regards to waiving 50% of airport rent payments on short-term basis to enable airport authorities to invest the capital to enhance their facilities. Can you provide an update on that, what the recommendation to government on that, and what has occurred as a result of that recommendation?
The expert on this report from our perspective.
Yeah, on that was more of the transportation industry was looking at that further, so I don't really have any more comments on that. Sorry about that.
Important question.
Also, with regards, Mr. Whalen, there was a recommendation under the timing of immediate with the complete the twinning of the Highway 185, which connects Quebec to New Brunswick. Any updates on that? Did the government fulfill that pledge? Funding provided? Do we know?
Same position on that one as the last question. You know, that was more of a transportation point.
So we don't know in terms of timing?
I can't answer it now.
Okay. Okay. I'll cede some time to my colleague.
Monsieur Van Popta.
Mr. Van Popta.
Mr. Whalen or Mr. Montanti, whoever may want to answer this question. It again refers to the final report of the National Supply Chain Task Force, and you talked about some town halls. I was at one of them in Vancouver, and I listened intently to a lot of the participants. And they pointed to the long-term strategic actions on page 35. Number one was to establish a supply chain office to unify the federal government's responsibility, and that was to be given to have been started within 12 months. We're at about 18 months now, and I just wonder what the status is of that supply chain office.
Yeah, from what I understand is that hasn't moved forward at all, and that's been one of the recommendations that hasn't moved forward.
And is there any reason for that? I know the participants at the meeting I was at were concerned that it might become another bureaucratic boondoggle. You know, the idea sounds great, but how is it going to work out? So do you know what the cause is for the delay?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
How much time are we done?
1 minute.
1 minute.
Campbell, you had talked about a white paper from 2019. I was wondering, could you table that white paper with our committee?
Yes, and I have already submitted it.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Bon. C'est bon de votre côté.
Good for you, yes? Mr. Greer.
Quickly, I know there's been a number of questions on the supply chain task force report. So we have a free private members bill idea for anybody here who wants to take it. Free. No charge. Which is everybody at this table invests an incredible amount of time and energy, including talking to our members' lived experiences to contribute to these exercises, these studies, these task form reports, and other consultations. Often we become frustrated that it's unclear what the response will be to them. This is not a new phenomenon. This is stretching back decades. So my idea to table here is that the government should either comply or explain to these reports. So either follow through on the recommendations or clearly be required to explain why they will not. That would create a lot of certainty for all stakeholders that participate in these exercises. It would make sure that we're actually leveraging these reports, and it would give the government a chance to proceed or say why they're not proceeding.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Final 5 minutes from Mr. Sidhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we know, Parliament will soon be casting an important vote for the Modernized Canada-Ukraine agreement, which was signed by our Prime Minister and, of course, President Zelensky. We're speaking about supply chains and impacts of world events. Could you comment on how the conflict in Ukraine has exacerbated supply chain challenges both here domestically in Canada and around the world? Anybody that wants to take that and speak to supply chains and how we're all...
Just quickly, one of the initiatives that we were very proud to support as part of the International Chamber of Commerce was the Black Sea Grains Initiative. And so that was to ensure that we could still see the free flow of important commodity grains through that area of the world. Obviously, it also had a big impact on our Canadian growers and agri-foods as well. More personally, here within our office, we are very proud to have recently hired a Ukrainian to our team who studied here at Carleton University and has just joined our policy team. So we feel this personally, and we feel a tremendous investment in our shared priority with the nation of Ukraine.
And thank you for that. And it's important that we continue to be there to help Ukraine. We heard from industry here in Canada. I've heard directly from industry, Ukrainian community in Kelowna when I was there, the importance of this modernized trade agreement. And so we need to make sure we get it through the House as soon as possible. Ms. Campbell, you got cut off at the beginning with your opening remarks. I'm not sure if you have some things to add.
I think actually it was about the white paper. I just wanted to share a little more about that. We definitely feel that there's an opportunity to have an interagency council. We feel like there's too many silos, and this has been part of the problem. Everyone's trying hard to do their mission, but it's not cohesive, and there's not a plan. So that would be the lost opportunity I had in those comments. Thank you very much for providing that to me now.
You added the financial security. Before it was $5,000 for importers, and now it's $20,000.
Yeah, the minimum is $5,000 today, and it will go up to $25,000 under CARM.
Okay,
we're waiting for the regulations. You know, they tell us they can't implement without them. It's already February, so that's an interesting journey as well that we continue.
And the number of importers registered on CARM right now, is it 50,000 or 2,000?
It's under 50,000. Okay. We're told, actually, in the submission that came to this committee back in May, there's 200,000 importers.
So about 25% of the community has registered.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Très bien, merci. Alors, je remercie.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their attendance and their testimony. This was very enlightening. Now, for the committee's attention on February 6th, we'll be continuing committee business, still looking at the very same issue relating to supply chains. We'll be getting witnesses from both Quebec and the Atlantic region. I'll thank my colleagues and their witnesses for their indulgence. My first time as chair, probably last time, to be honest, maybe the one and only. I'm not sure. After Louis Plamondon, who was, I'm perhaps the only person in my position to chair this committee. Would the committee like to adjourn? This committee is adjourned. Thank you.